threat in North Korea. Kim Jong-un and his communist regime get top billing as U.S. officials meet with their Chinese counterparts. Pro-life victory. Georgia's 6th district stays red as the Republicans pick up another victory. We explore the role of Planned Parenthood. Helping out. As famine grips South Sudan, the Vatican is coming to its aid. We'll have a report from Rome. Players score a touchdown at the Vatican.
Thank you very much. Pray for me, don't forget.
As Pope Francis greets NFL Hall of Famers. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, June 21st, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The FBI is looking at terrorism as a possible motive in the stabbing of an officer at a Michigan airport. The officer with the Bishop International Airport Police in Flint was stabbed in the neck Wednesday morning. The officer was in critical condition but has since been upgraded to stable condition. Police say one person is in custody. Representative Steve Scalise, the House Majority Whip who was shot last week, is making good progress. Doctors say he's been upgraded to fair condition, and we are learning more about the shooter.
At this time, the FBI has assessed that the deceased shooter, James Thomas Hodgkinson, acted alone. We also assessed that there was no nexus to terrorism. The FBI is investigating this shooting as an assault on a member of Congress and assault on a federal officer.
The FBI says James Hodgkinson carried a list with the names of 6 members of Congress. Agents also say he was known to have anger management issues. He was killed by police during the shootout. The U.S. and China begin high-level security talks in Washington. Topping the agenda, North Korea's nuclear ambitions and their defiance of the UN Security Council. The meeting comes amid outrage over the death of an American college student after he was jailed by the North Koreans. National security correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Defense Secretary Jim Mattis are hoping that China can put more pressure on companies that deal with North Korea. They want China to use its economic leverage against the North Koreans and hopefully halt the regime's move towards building a nuclear missile capable of striking the United States.
What you're seeing, I think, is the American people's frustration with a regime that provokes and provokes and provokes and basically plays outside the rules.
Mattis and Tillerson have been hosting the Chinese foreign policy chief and the chief of staff of the People's Liberation Army at the State Department. Both sides support the idea of denuclearizing the Korean peninsula, but many within the U.S. government say there's more the Chinese can do to change the North Koreans' attitude.
Today's meeting comes as U.S. lawmakers are pressing for a tough response against Pyongyang over its treatment of 22-year-old Otto Warmbier. The American college student died earlier this week in the U.S. after a year and a half in a North Korean prison. Warmbier was accused of trying to steal a propaganda banner while visiting with a tour group and was convicted of subversion. Kenneth Bae, a Christian missionary who was imprisoned in North Korea for nearly 2 years, calls what happened to Warmbier devastating.
Every life is very important. And Warmbier life is important, and all the detainees and 24 million people living under such a terrible stage right now. And so I do hope that President Trump will take stand with North Korean governments.
Bae says the North Korean regime is guilty of numerous human rights violations. Authorities say 3 U.S. citizens are still being detained in North Korea.
In addition to the topic of North Korea here at the State Department, there's also been a whole lot of different discussions on a number of security concerns, including the South China Sea, where Beijing's island buildup and possible military construction have not only rattled Washington, but caused a number of concerns with their neighbors. Lauren?
Wyatt, on North Korea, is the administration still considering a travel ban?
Yes, they are still considering a travel ban, but they do realize and acknowledge the fact that if they did implement a travel ban, it would only slightly hurt the North Korean economy. They say if they really want to impact the North Korean economy in a big way, it all goes through China. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Like past presidents, Donald Trump is finding the U.S. has limited scope for punishing North Korea, even when it arrests U.S. citizens. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president has praised his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping for trying to contain North Korea. The hermit nation depends on China for 90% of its trade. Still, China's efforts haven't delivered any results. In the White House press briefing yesterday, Sean Spicer said the U.S. will continue to work with China to put appropriate pressure on North Korea. But in a tweet, President Trump seems to be throwing in the towel on China and its ability to deal with North Korea, saying, "While I greatly appreciate the efforts of President Xi and China to help with North Korea, it has not worked out. At least I know China tried." Jason Russell with the Washington Examiner says one tweet doesn't mean President Trump is done seeking China's help in dealing with North Korea.
That's just one tweet. And we know from Trump's tweets in the past that one tweet does not a new U.S. policy make, right? There are still all kinds of people, advisors and people in the State Department that I don't think are going to let this be the end of the effort to ally with China against North Korea. We need China as an ally against North Korea. They're the only ones who can really apply economic pressure against the North Koreans because they're already so isolated against everyone else.
Jason Russell tells me the death of American Otto Warmbier may have provoked the president to send that tweet. One thing to note, Lauren, Warmbier was traveling with a tour company based in China when he visited North Korea. That company says it will no longer take Americans to North Korea due to the high risk involved.
Mark, I understand the president is in Iowa tonight. Is it already time for another election caucus?
Not yet, but the president is flying to Cedar Rapids this evening. The last time he was in Iowa was just days before his election victory. The main event tonight, the president will participate in one of his signature Make America Great Again rallies.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. The U.S.-Russia relationship takes another step back. Russia is suddenly rejecting plans to hold talks between our two countries. The move comes after the U.S. reinforced sanctions against Russia for its incursion into the Ukraine. There is some good news about that conflict, since both sides agreed to a new ceasefire today. Top investigators say Russia's meddling in the 2016 presidential election was part of an aggressive cyber attack against the U.S. They testified before Congress today.
In 2016, the Russian government, at the direction of Vladimir Putin himself, orchestrated cyber attacks on our nation for the purpose of influencing our election. That is a fact, plain and simple.
Former Homeland Security Secretary Jay Johnson says the key question is how to defend against future cyber attacks. Investigators don't believe Russian interference changed the final election. The president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, arrives in Israel to lay the groundwork for a peace deal. Kushner, who is President Trump's chief Middle East advisor, met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this afternoon. He then headed to the West Bank to meet with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. The White House says a Mideast peace deal is one of President Trump's top priorities. Pro-life voters in Georgia celebrate a big win. Republican Karen Handel declaring victory in the state's 6th congressional district after the most expensive race in U.S. history. Tom Price vacated the seat to become the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi has been following the race. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Planned Parenthood pumped more than $700,000 into this congressional race. They backed Handel's opponent, Democrat Jon Ossoff, who supports, in his words, a woman's right to choose. Karen Handel is pro-life and backed by state and national pro-life groups. Republican Karen Handel wins a wealthy suburban Atlanta district comfortably by 4 percentage points. The former Georgia Secretary of State was quick to embrace her party's leader.
And a special thanks to the President of the United States of America.
Ahead of the election, commentators called the race a referendum on President Trump. Last night, he congratulated Handel and also tweeted, well, the special elections are over, and those that want to make America great again are 5-0. But the race is also another loss for Planned Parenthood, which invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in Democrat Jon Ossoff.
Voters turned away from far-left politics yesterday.
They are just trying to protect their cash cow, and They didn't succeed, and going forward, more and more people are recognizing the darkness that this organization represents.
Susan B. Anthony List, a pro-life lobby group, endorsed Karen Handel and called her a pro-life champion.
This is the beginning of something much bigger than us.
For Democrats, it's time now for finger-pointing and soul-searching ahead of the 2018 midterm elections. Representative Seth Moulton of Massachusetts tweeting, Ossoff race better be a wake-up call for Democrats. Business as usual isn't working. But party leaders who are spinning the loss in a positive light may just not be listening.
Typically in this district, a Republican wins by 20-plus points, and last night's win for them was incredibly much more narrow.
Democrats hope to use what they call anti-Trump sentiment to flip the seat last night. It's now clear they'll need more help for the 2018 midterm elections. Democrats will need to pick up 24 seats to take back the majority next year. Lauren?
It seems like we just ended an election and now we're starting all over again. The win does seem like an argument for Republicans to stick with President Trump and dismantle Obamacare. Is that what you're hearing?
That's right, Lauren. Democrats had said Republicans would be punished for trying to repeal Obamacare, but now it seems Republicans are saying even that they're on the right track, that Democrats are clearly wrong. What exactly that something wrong is something that will be debated for weeks and months to come.
Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol. Thank you, Jason. A Belgian prosecutor says the attacker who tried to blow up a Brussels train station yesterday was an ISIS sympathizer. The news comes amid tightened security in Belgium. The suspect tried to set off a powerful nail bomb and shouted, "God is great," in Arabic. He charged soldiers after his suitcase failed to fully explode. One then shot and killed him. Queen Elizabeth's husband, Prince Philip, is in the hospital tonight with an infection. Buckingham Palace says it's just a precautionary measure. He turned 96 this month. Meanwhile, the head of the British monarchy headed to Parliament to deliver the government's legislative agenda. The Queen's speech marked the ceremonial opening of the new session of Parliament. Elizabeth read the remarks written by the Prime Minister and her staff to offer goals for Britain's future, including the exit from the European Union. The United Nations says South Sudan is no longer enduring a famine, but the situation in the war-torn country is very critical. Pope Francis plans to send much-needed aid. The Vatican revealed his support for 3 new initiatives today. Alan Holdren is the Rome Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency. Alan, what new assistance is the Vatican providing in this terrible, terrible famine in South Sudan?
Well, Lauren, they rolled out projects today in the areas of health, education, and agriculture. As you know, in South Sudan, since 2011, when they declared independence, there's been a lot of unrest, and that's brought a lot of food shortages. So the Pope's aid to the tune of $500,000 is going towards financial support for formation, for hospitals, and also to provide seeds and agricultural equipment so they can grow their own food, at least in some communities.
I was talking to Catholic Relief Services, and they said, boy, this is going to be a very welcome contribution. What inspired the Holy Father to give this boost to South Sudan right now?
Well, they said in the Vatican that they're just trying to shed light on the situation again after it's largely fallen into that region of oblivion. Everyone's forgetting about this grave situation that exists there. Today they said that in February there were 100,000 people suffering from starvation. Today, just 6 months later, we've got 1 million people there, Lauren, who are suffering. So the Pope wanted to go to South Sudan. It was announced that he wouldn't be going this year in 2017, but he holds them very close to his heart. Cardinal Peter Turkson, who was there at the presentation today, said that even if the Pope can't be there, he wants to show them that he cares.
While he is planning, he wanted to, in the meantime, give a concrete, gesture, concrete, evidence of his big concern for everything that is happening to that country and its people.
Alan, I recently interviewed Cardinal Turkson when he came here to Washington, D.C., and he told us about the Vatican's concern for the refugees. What else is Cardinal Turkson doing?
Well, he's been to South Sudan himself. The Pope asked him to go, giving him 2 cards, one for the president and one for the vice president, who are at odds there in South Sudan, and that's where a lot of this unrest comes from. We also heard from Cardinal Turkson today that the Holy See diplomacy is working in this peace mediation process through a variety of networks. Just one more front that Pope Francis is working on in the diplomatic field. We also heard from the head of Caritas Internationalis, the biggest Catholic charitable organization in the world, who said today that unless this peace process gets back on track, the Pope will not be going to South Sudan.
It's so fascinating. I know that the refugees are leaving South Sudan and going to Uganda, and Uganda has the largest refugee camp in the entire world. It's BD. Thank you so much. Alan Holdren, Catholic News Agency.
Thank you, Lauren.
And Pope Francis is backing proposed legislation in Italy to better integrate migrants into society. During his weekly talk at the Vatican today, the Holy Father said he wanted to voice his appreciation for the campaign to overhaul the country's migration policy. Bishops in Italy have also voiced their support. Coming up, the U.S. braces for a tropical storm and a growing fight over Obamacare. What it means for people who depend on the program. Tropical storm Cindy threatens the Gulf Coast with drenching rain and flash flooding. The governors of Louisiana and Alabama have already declared states of emergency after the storm dumped up to 9 inches of rain. Cindy is the third tropical storm of 2017. As Senate Republicans steer toward a potential showdown on health care, Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price holds a listening session at the White House.
This challenge is an inherent challenge that exists because of the flaws within Obamacare, within the ACA.
Secretary Price blamed high deductibles on the current health care law. A draft of the Senate GOP bill is expected to be unveiled tomorrow, and it is expected to defund Planned Parenthood, the country's largest abortion provider. Planned Parenthood is fighting back. It's holding more than 50 pink out rallies in 20 states to maintain support for its programs. This includes lighting up bridges and buildings. Joining us now is Father Stephen Emberato of Priests for Life, and he hosts Defending Life on EWTN on Wednesdays and Thursdays. Welcome to the program.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Lauren.
I am thrilled that you're here, especially on this Pink Out Day. You are very involved in the pro-life movement, but have such a fascinating story of what drew you to it. Please tell us about that.
My pro-life story goes back to really the mid-'70s, a few years after Roe versus Wade legalized abortion in this country. I was away from the sacraments, away from the church, living with who I call my Eve, all right, my Eve, me being Adam.
Your girlfriend.
My Eve, right. And she got pregnant, and I did as many men do. I said, I'll support you in whatever decision you make, but then I kind of gave her all the reasons why it'd be best to have the abortion.
Wow.
She had the abortion. Thank God we came to the realization of what we did pretty quickly, her quicker than me, and we went to confession, got some counseling, went back to the sacraments for a little while, but then fell into the same lifestyle. Parted company, and it was decades later that I looked her up while I was in the seminary, actually, having come to the realization that as much as I repented of the abortion, that I really never repented or apologized to her for letting her down, for wounding her. And upon looking her up and having lunch with her, she told me that indeed it was twins that were aborted decades before. So I have 2 babies in heaven, Thomas and Mary, who are a constant encouragement for me to continue to do pro-life work until we end this scourge of preborn child killing.
And so you come here to Washington and you pray at the Planned Parenthood National Headquarters, which is very close to our studio, and you are involved in other pro-life activities. What are they?
All over the country, yes. Actually, they call me the protest priest because I like to do my pro-life work peacefully and prayerfully, but in front of these killing centers, in front of these abortion mills that I call modern-day Calvaries, where the most innocent blood of our culture is being shed because of the sins of the culture, just indeed as Christ shed his innocent blood because of the the sins, our sins. So I actually started coming to D.C. in the fall of 2015 when the Planned Parenthood over here was just under construction. And we did our best through peaceful and prayerful presence.
And I think it's important to say peaceful.
Oh, always peaceful. Exactly right. Always peaceful. That's the only way you're going to offset the violence that is abortion. I mean, Planned Parenthood is perpetrating violence. This is the reality that they accuse us of being the violent ones, but indeed that's projection on their part.
So I imagine that your faith story, that your healing has been possible now because of your involvement in the church. And I thank you so much, and in the pro-life movement. Thank you so much for joining us and for telling us your story.
Oh, my pleasure.
Father Stephen Emberato of Priests for Life. Up next, the Pope's itinerary in South America.
Peru is one of the top 10 countries where the Pope is most admired in the whole world.
And Francis talks football with some NFL legends. The annual Fortnight for Freedom campaign kicks off tonight with a special Mass in Baltimore, Maryland. Dioceses across the U.S. will highlight the importance of defending religious freedom. This is an initiative sponsored by the American bishops. We'll have special guests over the next 2 weeks on News Nightly, focusing on the initiative and religious freedom, our first freedom. New details about the Pope's itinerary for his visit to Chile and Peru have been released. Joining us now is Ursula Marao, Director of Digital Strategy and Social Media with Así Prensa in Lima, Peru. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren.
You know, Así Prensa is a Catholic news organization owned by EWTN, so we are so grateful that you can provide some context to the Pope's visit. How are Peruvians reacting?
Well, Peruvians are reacting with joy and excitement to the news. St. John Paul II visited Peru twice in the 80s, and the people here have been waiting for a Pope's visit for almost 30 years since then.
I know that you are going to be very busy covering this. He's coming to 3 cities in Peru and in Chile. What are they?
Yes, in Chile, he's going to Santiago, which is the capital city, to Temuco in the south, and Iquique at the north. In Peru, he will stay in Lima, but he will also go to Trujillo in the north, about 350 miles from Lima, and he will go to Puerto Maldonado, which is located in the jungle, in the Amazonian rainforest, very close to Bolivia, and where the Catholic Church has a very strong presence. In Chile, the hardest part would happen in Temuco. Temuco is known for the Mapuche conflict. The Mapuche people are an indigenous group that is claiming the property of lands that now belong to landlords and companies. Some Mapuche groups have had violent clashes with local authorities. They have burned different facilities and even a dozen Catholic churches in the last years.
Oh, that's awful.
So, yeah.
So I think that the Pope going there is a really strong message to Catholics. You know, the other issue is that the Vatican is dealing with cases of abuse in both of those countries. Do you think that the Pope will address the issue?
Well, actually, abuse truly has damaged the Catholic Church's credibility in the past years, both in Chile and Peru. Mainstream media in South America blame the Vatican for these cases and barely cover Pope Francis' statements about how he's dealing with abuse in the Catholic Church. So I think it would be very important for Peruvian and Chilean people to listen what the Pope has to say about this problem in their own language and in their own countries.
I think we'll be talking to you a lot in the future. Ursula Marao, Director of Digital Strategy and Social Media with Así Prensa, a Catholic news organization owned by EWTN. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren.
Football, not football, players came to the Vatican today. Pope Francis met with a delegation from the NFL Hall of Fame.
Sono un appassionato del football, ma nel paese da cui provengo si gioca in modo molto diverso.
Now, for those of you who don't speak Italian, he says he's an avid follower of football, but where he comes from in Argentina, it's played very differently, and that's referring to his passion for soccer. The NFL stars were accompanied by Carl Anderson of the Knights of Columbus. He thanked the Holy Father for highlighting the moral and spiritual dimensions of sports. Pope Francis says the values of teamwork and the pursuit of personal excellence are needed off the field. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'll see you again tomorrow night. Good night, and God bless you.